won't admit is broken. You cannot reform what you say doesn't need reforming. These are elements of Islam that need confrontation and reform by peaceful Muslims if there's ever going to be an end to their being put to use to justify violence. And for the next few minutes, I wanted to focus on 3 ways in which Muhammad is, in his words and deeds, are being used today in a deleterious fashion, and in a way that needs attention by Islamic reformers. The first is in the case of child marriage. Now, this is a very unpleasant subject, but according to Islamic tradition, recorded in the collection that Muslims consider most reliable, the Hadith of the Imam Bukhari, compiled in the 9th century, the Prophet of Islam married Aisha, his last and favorite wife, when she, actually not his last, but indeed his favorite wife, when she was a girl of 6 years of age, and he consummated the marriage when she was 9 years old. He was at this time in his early 50s. Now, I don't think it's fair to say on that basis that Muhammad was guilty of pedophilia. Pedophilia as a psychological or sociological category did not exist in 7th century Arabia. There was no standard by which he could be judged that would condemn that activity at his time. Child marriage was very common. He was not the first person to engage in marriage with a child. He was not the last. He was not the only one. And nobody in his day criticized him for contracting this marriage. However, because he is the excellent example of conduct, because there is no moral standard higher in traditional Islam than what Muhammad said and did, this is something in which his example has caused trouble. For example, the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran, when he took power in Iran in 1979, he made sure that there passed, rather quickly, Article 1041 of the Civil Code of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which stipulates that the marriageable age, the legal marriageable age of girls is 9. And this is an invitation of the Prophet. Khomeini himself married a 10-year-old when he was 28, and he advised in one of his many writings that marriage to a prepubescent girl was a divine blessing, and advised it as a model to follow. Unfortunately, Khomeini was not alone. In Yemen, an attempt by religious conservatives, so to speak, to abolish Yemen's legal minimum age of 15 for girls failed a few years back. They were trying to lower it from 15 down to something that was in line with Muhammad's example. They failed, but unfortunately, people on the ground in Yemen say that it is rarely enforced anyway, and child marriage is quite common. Meanwhile, the United Nations Children's Fund reports that over half the girls in Afghanistan and Bangladesh are married before they reach the age of 18. In 2002, when researchers entered refugee camps in Afghanistan and Pakistan after the Taliban was toppled there in Afghanistan, they found that more than 2 out of 3 of the girls of 2nd grade age were already married. And this is in line with the example of Muhammad. This is, unfortunately, a price that women have paid throughout Islamic history and continue to pay for Muhammad's example as an excellent model for conduct. Secondly, and of course, much more vivid for us today, particularly after 9/11, is warfare. According to Muhammad's earliest biographer, Ibn Ishaq, and this is something that became part of the mainstream understanding of the Quran, is also reflected in Quranic commentators, including Ibn Kathir, Ibn Juzai, the Tafsir al-Jalalain, and others that are read today and studied in madrasas around the world. The Quranic teaching about war came in 3 stages. When Muhammad first began preaching, he was nothing more than that, a preacher. And he taught tolerance. The 109th chapter of the Quran is all about that. The Quran is not arranged chronologically, but rather from the longest chapter to the shortest, with the exception of the first. And so, as it turns out, as a general rule, what is revealed earlier comes toward the end of the book because they tended to be shorter revelations earlier in his prophetic career. In any case, the 109th chapter of the Quran says to the unbelievers that you have your religion and we have ours. You will not believe what we believe and we will not believe what you believe, and basically we're going to leave each other alone. However, unfortunately, later he began to receive what he represented as divine revelations that first taught that he could wage defensive warfare to defend the Islamic community that was at that time in its infancy, and finally to wage offensive warfare to establish the hegemony of the laws of his new community over non-Muslims. This is not forced conversion. Forced conversion was forbidden. It is actually inaccurate to say Islam was spread by the sword, but Islamic law was spread by the sword. The rule of the law that he stipulated was the law of Allah. That was spread by the sword. Now, that did not mandate conversion for non-Muslims, but it did mandate their second-class status as inferiors without equality of rights before the law. Muhammad urged on and participated in this warfare. He himself fought in several battles. And also, he wrote a series of letters which I think are highly illuminating, to some of the great leaders of his day. Arabia, of course, was surrounded more or less by two great empires, the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and the Persian Empire. And he did write to, among others, the emperors of both of those. In his letter to Heraclius, the Eastern Roman emperor in Constantinople, he wrote this: "In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, this letter is from Muhammad, the slave of Allah and his messenger, to Heraclius, the ruler of the Byzantines. Peace be upon him who follows the true guidance." An aside is, it's interesting to note that in Islamic law, "Assalamu alaikum," peace be upon you, is the greeting that one Muslim should give to another, but it's forbidden to give it to a non-Muslim. You don't wish a non-Muslim peace, you say peace be upon those who follow the right guidance to a non-Muslim. In other words, peace be upon the Muslims only. And this is how Muhammad addressed Heraclius. Incidentally, this is also how Mahmoud Ahmadinejad wrote to President Bush in his invitation to Islam. It also begins in exactly the same way: peace be upon those who follow the right guidance. In any case, Muhammad then goes on to say, "Now then, I invite you to Islam. Embrace Islam, and you will be safe." Now that's a clear threat. Embrace Islam, and you will be safe. Presumably then, Heraclius and his people would not be safe if they did not embrace Islam. He wrote to some others more clearly, more specifically, "Embrace Islam, and your lives and your property will be safe. But if you do not embrace Islam, then there's no guarantee for either one, your lives or your property." Heraclius, of course, did not accept Islam, and the Byzantines were not safe. Shortly after Muhammad's death, the Islamic armies, motivated by these kinds of teachings of Muhammad, poured out of Arabia and overwhelmed the Byzantine provinces surrounding Arabia, which now have become the heart of the Islamic world, including Syria and Egypt and on into North Africa. And of course, they pressed into Spain and besieged Constantinople by the year 717, although it would be another 700 years before they would actually succeed in conquering Constantinople as well. Muhammad did not get a satisfactory answer either from Khosroes, the ruler of the Persians. It is said that after reading the letter he received from Muhammad, Khosroes tore it into small bits. And when news of this reached Muhammad, he called upon Allah to tear the Persian Empire and its emperor into small bits. And he said, "When Khosroes perishes, there will be no more after him. And when Caesar perishes, there will be no more Caesar after him. By him in whose hand Muhammad's life is, you will spend the treasures of both of them in Allah's cause." And indeed, in that, he turned out to be correct. That is what happened. He received a revelation from Allah, chapter 9, verse 29 of the Quran, that commanded Muslims to fight even Jews and Christians, the people of the book, as they are denoted in the Quran, until they accepted Islamic hegemony, symbolized by payment of a poll tax called the jizya, and discriminatory regulations that would ensure that they would be constantly reminded of their subordinate position. It says that the Muslims must fight those who believe not in Allah or the last day, nor hold that forbidden which has been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth, even if they are of the people of the book, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued.